Hi guys, I'm a history teller guy, and today episode it's about the Nazi paradise, or it's called a Free Republic of Nias. It was a short-lived unrecognized state proclaimed by the German prisoners on the Indonesian island of Nias. It exists for less than a month until the island was fully occupied by the Japanese troops on 22nd of April 1942. So let's see how this could happen. On 10th May 1940, Nazi Germany invaded the Netherlands. The Dutch government in the Dutch East Indies retaliated by arresting German nationals. The Dutch government in Nias, headed by G.L. Pless as the controller of the region, began arresting German missionaries and doctors whose predecessors had been active since the 1880s in North Sumatra. Meanwhile, to north of the Nias of the city of Kutatsana, Aceh, about 2,400 German men and women were imprisoned by the Dutch troops. Knowing of the expected Japanese invasion of the Dutch East Indies, the Dutch government planned to send them to the British India. The prisoners were transferred to Sibolga on the north of the Sumatra to then be transported to India in three groups. The first two groups arrived in India. For the third group, the ship was carrying the prisoners. SS von Imhoff was attacked by Japanese bombers about 177 km of west coast of Sumatra and fatally damaged. The prisoners were abandoned by the captain and the crew who left using the lifeboats. Of the 477 prisoners, 201 survived the sinking, while 276 prisoners immediately drowned. 134 of the survivors who were on the rafts later drowned. Only 67 reached the Nias. The survivors who reached the Nias were in two groups. The first, consisting of 53 prisoners, moved to parallel to the shoreline on 21st of January 1942. They saw a tiny beach with a coral in front of it. They disembarked and searched for a sign of life, finding a small creek, but no food. That afternoon, a Catholic Dominican pastor named Van Starlen appeared with 2 bottles of wine, promising to come back the next day with a doctor and food, and guided them to some local people. The native people stated they were Christian and informed them they were at Nias. The second group, consisting of 14 prisoners, reached Hilisamanto, southern of Nias. One, Albert Van Rink, saw an isolated house. Several prisoners went to the house, and the homeowner, feeling threatened, cut some coconut for the group. The incident attracted nearby villagers. One of the villagers was able to communicate with the prisoners, who told him about the Van Imhoff incident. After the villagers left and as survivors had slept, one Dr. Haid was invited by the villagers' chief to a meeting. The next day, the second group began to march to the capital of Nias, Gunung Sitoli. They found a local taxi to transport them to the closest village. There, while having a feast served by the locals, they were found by the Dutch authorities. Unwilling to treat them as prisoners, the Dutch authorities released them and let them go to the capital on their own. The groups would later meet at the crossroads. A truck about 60 miles away from Gunung Sitoli was waiting for the prisoners and transport them to the prison guarded by 38 Veldpolice. It's like a local guards and several Dutch soldiers. After several days in the prison, news arrived that Sibolga, a city located in the mainland Sumatra, had been occupied by the Japanese. The German prisoners convinced the Veldpolice to defect from the Dutch by arguing that Germany and Japan were winning the war. On 28th of March, the Veldpolice revolted against their Dutch bosses. They opened fire Dutch houses and freed the German prisoners. Albert Van Rijk stated the Veldpolice appeared that after the shootout that diminished, they distributed firearms to the freed Germans from the prison arsenal. The Dutch were unarmed and the arsenal had almost all the weapons. Only the doctors and the deputy resident of Nias had firearms at home, even though the Welt police and the German prisoners were greatly outnumbered. Only the Dutch person was wounded. Shortly after the shootout, the deputy resident and the controller and the head of the Dutch police in Nias, along with 5 British soldiers and several Dutch priests and other Dutch inhabitants, were arrested and put behind bars. At first the Dutch and the prisoners thought they were going to be shot, but later on figured out that only the revolting Welt police had simply separated them into male and female prisons. On the next day, 29 March 1942, in cooperation with Nias figures, the former German prisoners proclaimed a free Republic of Nias in the name of Adolf Hitler. One of them, Ernst Leo Fischer, became the first prime minister. He appointed Albert van Ring as the foreign minister. The declaration of the Republic was met with joy by the local inhabitants, as they were the first in the Dutch East Indies to throw off the colonial rule of the Dutch government. Even though the people of the Nias hoped much of the new republic, the Germans themselves did not consider the republic seriously, as they considered it to be a joke. Learning that the Welt police would revolt if they were not paid, the Germans looted money amounting of 8,500 from deputy resident house and shops, which consisted of 3 months of wage for all of the government employees in Nias and in the inhabitants' savings. Some of this was given to the Welt police to ensure their loyalty, while some the Germans kept. 9 patrol groups were formed to guard Nias, each consisting of German and Welt police armed with carabine. The Germans also took as many weapons as possible and occupied the radio station in order to contact the Japanese who had already taken Sumatra. The attempt failed, as the Japanese and the Germans could not understand each other. On 31st of March 1942, 2 Dutch ships, SS Sumatra and SS Salida, arrived at Gunung Sitali harbor. The Germans acted cautiously and approached with rifles. The captain, blue mares and flute hoists were unaware that the island was occupied, and shocked when they saw the armed Germans. Both were imprisoned by the Germans, and when they learned from the captives the Dutch ships were being rented by Japanese in Sumatra to ship rice from Nias, the Germans realized that the Japanese had not known that they were on the island. One of the prisoners, Grass Hoff, used the radio to play a German military song and thus identified their presence to the Japanese force. On 17 April, the Japanese arrived on Nias with 6 ships and around 200 troops to occupy it. The government members of the Free Republic of Nias, Leo Fischer and Albert van Ring, and other Germans welcomed them at the harbor. The Japanese were greeted with the Nazi salute, and the school children were singing would be an Indonesian national anthem. Even though the island had been formally occupied by the Japanese, the Germans still managed to organize a small event to celebrate Hitler's birthday. The Germans brought a portrait of Hitler and ended with the triple banzai and Nazi salute. On 22nd of April, the Japanese occupied the south part of the island by sea. The remaining Europeans on the island, regardless of nationality, were transferred to Sumatra on 24th of April. So is that how it ended, the Nazi paradise. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, please like or subscribe, and see you in the next one.